This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Could The Mandalorian be setting up the gradual removal of Disney's sequel trilogy from Star Wars canon? We have previously reported on rumors that this could be the plan going forward, and now we have some early indications that this might indeed be what is happening. In this video, we will first recap the rumors and the detailed predictions derived from them, before we explore the recent findings from The Mandalorian and assess whether or not this is a coincidence or evidence adding support to the rumors that Kathleen Kennedy's Star Wars is about to go the way of the Christmas special. The rumors were first disseminated to the public by our good friend Dictor von Doomcock, and they claim that the new regime at Lucasfilm are secretly planning on wiping Disney's sequel trilogy from Star Wars canon. The alleged backdrop for this is obvious. Lucasfilm was a $4.05 billion investment for Disney, and in order to make a return on it, the Star Wars brand had to expand, both at the box office and in merchandise sales. Instead, the opposite happened. The $2 billion The Force Awakens grossed at the worldwide box office should have been a baseline. Instead, it became the high watermark. Half the moviegoing audience was lost between it and the final installment of the trilogy, The Rise of Skywalker, which was outperformed by the R-rated and comparatively low-budget Joker at the box office. Well, Star Wars has a new sheriff in town in Jon Favreau, and he is executing another vision for the property, one alleged not to include the sequel trilogy as part of its canon. The in-canon justification for this is rumored to be the Veil of the Force, but our own sources were able to provide further details on how this removal would be achieved in practice, which we first reported on back in July. According to our sources, the plan for removing the sequel trilogy from canon is not to make any kind of explicit statement to that end. They won't admit it's no longer canon for a long time down the line, as doing that would be too great and too public an admission of failure. Instead, the plan is to simply not address the sequel trilogy, and effectively pretend it never happened. Rather than going forward from the sequel trilogy, they will instead map out the era in the immediate aftermath of the original trilogy. This gives them a reason to ignore the sequel trilogy, as it still lies in the future. Or rather, one possible future, one they might not be building towards. Herein lies the testable prediction. Unlike the prequel trilogy, which was foreshadowing the original trilogy, The Mandalorian, the upcoming Obi-Wan series, and everything else to come taking place in this era will not foreshadow the sequel trilogy. Instead, our sources claim, they will little by little introduce subtle but deliberate inconsistencies, the sum of which will point to a different future, enabling them to eventually overwrite the events of the sequel trilogy, it being relegated to a parallel timeline that never happened. In other words, if these rumors are accurate, we should not expect any kind of foreshadowing of the sequel trilogy, but rather subtle inconsistencies that conflict with it. Now, with that established, let's see what keen fans spotted in The Mandalorian. This comes to us from Bounding into Comics. In a November 2nd article titled "The Mandalorian Animation Director Hal Hickel Implies the Show is Undoing the Rise of Skywalker," they write, "During The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 1 The Marshal, an astute fan discovered that during the flashback scene showing the destruction of the second Death Star, the text around the exploding Death Star reads, 'Little does Luke know that the Galactic Empire has secretly begun construction on a new armored space station even more powerful than the first dreaded Death Star.'" The fan rightly pointed out that this was from the opening crawl in The Return of the Jedi. The fan would then inquire as to why and how the text was used to both Lucasfilm creative art manager Phil Szostak and Lucasfilm story group member Matt Martin. Szostak would respond, "That's undoubtedly an ILM VFX element, so I'm sure the text is just there as a fun Easter egg. He then asked Hal Hickel to comment. Hickel seemingly confirmed Sostak's claims with a simple yep. Another fan would then ask, who filmed the Death Star blowing up? And how come there's no debris left, but there's some debris left over in The Rise of Skywalker? Hickel then responded, don't know who filmed it. As for the second question, it looks that way because we were matching Jedi. If indeed they're matching the Return of the Jedi, then that would imply that the second Death Star was completely destroyed in space and that there were no parts left to crash on Kefbir in The Rise of Skywalker. Twitter user Stephen Wainart would point this out writing, you were matching Return of the Jedi, but you contradicted The Rise of Skywalker. Was that intentional? Hickel has so far not commented further, but the implication appears to be clear. As the Bounding into Comics article then points out, the on-screen dissemination of information about the secret second Death Star's destruction comes with issues of its own, but in my opinion, they're minor ones. The key takeaway here is the overt statement that they were matching Return of the Jedi, not The Rise of Skywalker. Now, contrast that to Galaxy's Edge. On that, the powers that be at the time were matching The Force Awakens, not the original Star Wars, as Kathleen Kennedy's thinking at the time was that the original trilogy was a thing of the past, while the sequel trilogy represented the future and what fans would gravitate towards.
Right.
While Kathleen Kennedy remains the figurehead of Lucasfilm, she is no longer in charge of Star Wars. Jon Favreau is, and his loyalty is clearly towards the original trilogy. To be clear, this little Easter egg is not conclusive evidence that the sequel trilogy is being removed from canon. However, it is noteworthy that here they were in a position where they could choose between giving on-screen credence to either Return of the Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker, and they chose the original trilogy over the sequel trilogy. What is even more noteworthy to me, though, is that this was a visual Easter egg that they did not have to include. If they had merely referenced the event without showing the flashback, then not only would that have cost less, they would have bypassed the issue altogether. But in showing that flashback, they very subtly singled out an area of conflict between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, and made it clear that the Mandalorian sides with the original. Consider what our sources said back in July, that they would gradually introduce subtle inconsistencies, which in not so many words would signal to observant fans that the sequel trilogy doesn't so much represent the future, as it represents, in X-Men terms, the days of future past. A possible future that won't happen. But what does that mean for Star Wars going forward? Could we be getting a new sequel trilogy? We are now firmly in rumor territory, so treat everything as such. But to be clear, I have not heard anything about us getting a new sequel trilogy. To the extent of which there will even be any more trilogies, they are more likely to be set in the past. The events of Disney's sequel trilogy could very well be overwritten down the line, but by way of completely different events taking place in that time frame. But if that happens, it will probably happen on Disney+, as that is likely the primary home for Star Wars going forward. The last I've heard is that Disney are continuously assessing the situation, but that they question if in the post-pandemic world there will still be a theatrical market to justify high-end mega-budget features like the Star Wars movies have been up to this point. Oh, there might still be theatrical Star Wars movies, but they will likely be smaller in scale and scope, and end up on streaming faster. Between that and everything else, which is also increasingly going direct to streaming, you'll be spending a lot of time online, and when you're online, you need to protect your data, and the best way to do that is by using a VPN, such as the one delivered by this channel's sponsor, Surfshark. A VPN, or Virtual Private Network, is a privacy protection tool which guarantees instant online safety. Surfshark encrypts all the data sent via the internet, so that no one can obtain or steal your data, including usernames, passwords, and private messages. On top of that, Surfshark allows you to bypass geo-blocking restrictions by changing the country you access the internet from, which also gives you access to 15 different Netflix libraries by simply changing your virtual location. One of the advantages with Surfshark over many other VPN providers is that it allows one account to be used on unlimited devices. That's part of the reason why Surfshark is the VPN of our choice, and it gets even better. If you use our code MIDNIGHT upon checkout, you'll get 83% off the list price, plus 3 extra months for free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Do check out the link in the description below for further details and to order. With that, let me know what you make of The Mandalorian introducing inconsistencies between itself and the rise of Skywalker in the comments.